Hello, everyone, and welcome back to class here in Bio 215, also known as plant taxonomy, where we want to be able to take a look at the world around us and ask questions dealing with plant science. And so, in this module, we're going to explore two fascinating areas as our start to thematic section number 2. And these will help us understand really the diversity and the uniqueness of plants on our planet. But we want to investigate where they may occur and how scientists document them and study plant diversity across time and space. And these two topics are called phytogeography and herbarium science. In fact, I actually have a herbarium collection right here. Now, I know these topics might sound very complicated in terms of their names and probably scientific concepts, but at the end of this week's class, you'll find that these concepts are actually connected to many things you encounter in your everyday life. From forests surrounding your community to an invasive species that are spreading across landscapes. The response of plants to climate change phenomena, and even conservation and agriculture. Even historical records that help scientists understand how ecosystems have changed over hundreds of years. And so let's dive in to this topic this week. So we have to ask ourselves a question. All good scientific investigations begin with a question. And let's start with the first term. What is phytogeography? To simply put it, phytogeography is the study of geographic distribution of plants. Scientists who study phytogeography want to ask questions, such as why do cacti naturally grow in deserts but not in the tropical rainforests of, say, the Amazon? What or why are redwood trees, and why are they found along the Pacific Coast North America corridors but nowhere else in the world, and why do they get to be such massive sizes? But also, why do plant species occur across entire continents while others exist on a single mountain range? At its core, phytogeography is all about understanding relationships between plants and place. Think about your own region. Let's say you are located in the Appalachian Mountains, also known as Appalachia. You might notice forests dominated by oak, hickory, maple, and tulip poplar. But if you travel to, say, Arizona, you would encounter saguaro cactus, chrysold bushes, and other desert-adapted plants. Or we can go to the far north into almost the Arctic Circle with Alaska, and you'll find entirely different plant communities adapted for much colder conditions. To me, I think that's fascinating as a scientist. I study biogeography as one of my academic interests, and plants are a good source of data to be able to help understand trends. But the obvious question ultimately is, why? And the answer actually involves a variety of different combinations of characteristics found in environments where plants are commonly collected. We have to consider the climate, the temperature, rainfall, soil characteristics, overall elevation of a region. The geologic history is also important. The evolutionary history of that plant group you are studying, and us as humans, as we have impacted our planet on a rate that surpasses natural processes over the last 2 to 300 years. And phytogeographers study all of these factors to understand the distribution of plants. We've discussed where plants occur and why they occur. Let's talk about how scientists document this information. And this brings us to our second part of the module for the week, herbarium science. But what is a herbarium? Well, an herbarium is a collection of preserved plant specimens that have been carefully gathered, identified, and stored for scientific study. In fact, I actually have a stack right here that I'm taking a look at. This one is black gum. And you'll see that it has been put onto some cardboard, it has been dried and pressed upon it, and even has a label. So that way it can be easily stored and referenced. So when we think of an herbarium collection, think of it again like a library, but instead of books, it just contains plants. And scientists collect these plants out in the field and mount them on that cardboard or whatever archival materials they have. And each specimen typically includes the scientific name, who collected it, when they collected it, the location, habitat description, and additional observations they've made. And that the specimens actually become permanent records of plant occurrences, and then when put together, tell the story of a plant community within a specific study area. And some herbarium specimens are over 200 years old, and they are still relevant today. Imagine being able to see exactly what plants are growing in specific locations before the highways and shipping centers, data centers, or modern cities even existed. And I think that's one of the best values of an herbarium collection, because they matter. At first glance, you're thinking, it's just a dried piece of plant on a paper, not very exciting. But herbarium specimens are just scientific gold mines. We can answer questions like, where was the species historically found over time and space? How the distribution may have changed, and when did an invasive species first start to appear in the area? If we take a look at flowers preserved in an herbarium, we can actually determine how they may have changed over decades. And are populations declining or expanding based on the amount of occurrences or observations of that plant found in the wild and in an herbarium collection? For example, a scientist, when they're studying climate change, they actually take a look at thousands of herbarium specimens and discover that some plants are flowering earlier than they did decades ago, and their variations of flowers, such as color and shape, also change as a response to the changing climate. And the specimens therefore provide a historical timeline that would be otherwise impossible to reconstruct. They provide data points of that on a genetic level to be able to demonstrate that they are indeed trying to adapt to the newer climates. And that's why herbariums matter, and that they also play a role in conservation. Because researchers can search herbarium records to determine where plants are starting to decline and where they're reappearing, and which habitats do they prefer. In some cases, herbarium specimens may represent populations that are no longer functioning in the wild. Today, herbariums are becoming digital. Institutions around the world are scanning their specimens and placing them online. And that means researchers, students like yourself, and citizen scientists can access collections without physically having to visit a museum or a university. In fact, we have already started to use these in the course. We just haven't given them a name. And these digital databases allow us to analyze thousands, if not millions, of specimens simultaneously. But for the purpose of this course, we're only going to look at a few notable examples or handfuls of these. Let's go back to that Appalachian example. When we have a researcher that's interested in wildflowers, they can actually go to these databases and just search for the term wildflowers and pull up records of dozens of herbarium specimens and map data to show the distribution of wildflowers throughout a whole region. And this combination of traditional collections and modern technology has really transformed the science of botany. And one of the reasons why we offer this course online is because we have access to these different collections. And, well, let's connect phytogeography and herbarium science together, because that's one of the reasons why I focus on these two topics this week. We have to ask ourselves, how do these two topics fit together? And where do plants occur and why? Well, herbarium science provides much of the evidence needed to answer the question, and that every herbarium specimen represents a data point through time and space. And when thousands of specimens are combined, scientists can reconstruct a historical distribution, track changes through time, and better understand the evolutionary patterns that plants take based upon their location and where they're found, and that the herbarium serves as a foundation for phytogeographic research. And without careful plant collections, our understanding of plant distributions would be much more limited. And so, looking ahead throughout this module, I want to be able to show you on how we learn about plant distributions and try to identify major phytogeographic patterns and use herbarium collections to document biodiversity. And you'll have plenty of opportunity to explore the plant records as part of your assignment online. And consider taking a look at some of these distribution patterns and think about how the environment may change between locations. Because every plant, or at least in this case, every data point, tells a story. Because it reflects millions of years of change and influence from the climate and interactions with their local ecology. And thanks to these collections, we can preserve that for generations to come, well after the plant may have actually gone extinct. And so thank you for joining me on this weekly welcome. And as you move through the module, I want to encourage you to think about how the landscapes change around you just by looking at the plants, and what species may be restricted to certain habitats and how these distributions may change in the future. I look forward to exploring these questions with you this week, and let's get started. If you require any assistance, please reach out during my open office hours. You can send me an email, you can set up a video chat, or swing by my office in room 208 on the main campus. I am here to support you on your learning journey. Thank you.